Bonjour. Bonjour, bonjour. 44, 45 people already. How long have you been waiting for? This is great. Let me start this guy so I can see the comments a little better, hopefully. Voila, perfect. Bonjour Bob. Bonjour Jen. Bienvenue Apéro with Véro number 10. So this is our first time on YouTube. And you know I've been waiting a long time for this. And I know some of you have been waiting too. It took a while for me to get access to YouTube mobile live. And I want to say thank you because you helped me get the 1,000 subscribers that I needed. Coucou Steph. That I needed to access that service, and even then it took a few more weeks to do that. Good. This is your first time on the Apéro, or not? Hopefully not your first time on YouTube, Leslie. So the Apéro is number 10 is a little bit different. I've explained that. I hope you saw the description. What happened is with Instagram, we did this for many weeks on Instagram, but it was really hard to capture some of the replays. And so what happened was we missed some of the great episodes, and people were very disappointed that they had missed, and because they were hoping to watch the replay. So my plan is to have a replay for this. I've heard it can take a while for the replay to upload if you do it on mobile. It might take several hours, I have no idea. So be patient. If you don't see the replay right away, it might be tomorrow when I post it. Knock on wood. Fingers crossed. We have 50 people here right now. Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour Gail from California. So today it's a little special because A, we're doing it on YouTube and I'm filming horizontally. I hope you're enjoying this. And two, I'm doing it from my desk. I changed a little bit, but I will be moving into the kitchen. You know, that'll be 2.5 steps and then I'll be in my kitchen. So we can talk about the apéro at the end like we've been doing. And the other difference is also that I am doing this is a replay of number 5 when we went to the Périgord. Yes, I'm seeing your post, Mona. I'm seeing what you're typing. I'm seeing the comments scroll by. Bonjour, Lynn. I see a lot of familiar names here. Oh, bonjour from Toulouse, my hometown. Hello, bonjour, bonjour. So yeah, so we're going to talk about Le Périgord, that beautiful French region again today, and also about Josephine Baker, because so many people had missed it and we didn't have a replay for it. So I've changed the presentation. I think I've improved the presentation. There are more photos. It'll be a little bit longer. And the good news is we don't have a time limit like I had on Instagram where everything had to be, oh, the comments are covering my face. I don't know what to do about this because when I'm looking at it, I see my face and the comments are on the side. So I'm not really sure what to do. I think you should have a way to turn off the comments if you don't want to see them on your iPad or your phone or wherever you're watching. But where I'm looking, the comments are on the side. I'm not a YouTube pro, so they are on the side. Thank you, Bob. So apparently they are on the side. So for some of you, it's working. Okay, good. So hopefully you can still see my face. And you know my broadcasts are very artisanal. Move to the left. Okay, I'll move to the left. There we go. Is that good? Yes, Steph says you can turn the comments off, people, if you don't want to see them, okay? So I'm going to start the broadcast. You know it's artisanal. What I do is I film what I show you on my iPad. But because I can film this way, I think it'll be a lot perfect. Ah, good. I'm glad it's working for you. Perfect. Happy to please. Happy to please, if I can make it happen. Hey, Katie. I see some former neighbors in Woodinville, Washington. They're watching. That's awesome. Welcome, welcome. So what you see is behind me, my little studio. You see the poster of Toulouse, my hometown. and then I'll move, like I said, to the kitchen. So if you are ready to start, I don't see any real questions for now. Important questions. Now, you know that when I start my presentation, I can't really read the comments very well. So don't be mad at me if I don't get back to you. Ask the questions again at the end. We will do a Q&A. We have time for a Q&A today, okay? Coucou, coucou. Good to see Woodenville here. Bonjour, Janet. Okay, so I'm going to get this started. I need to flip this around. And we are going to make it work so you can see. Like I said, artisanal, my friends. Look at that. And what I'll do is turn off this light and turn this on. How about this? Is it good? I think that's about right. Yeah? It doesn't cover the whole screen, but it's hopefully picture quality should be pas mal, says Eric. Good. Hopefully picture quality should be better than it was on Instagram. We have 81, 83 people here. That's awesome. So we are about to take, thanks for the feedback. It helps me to know it's working. Thank you, guys. We are about to go on a field trip in le Périgord. And I wanted you to be able to see where that region is. So this is Paris right here. Metropolitan France, Paris is here. This is one of the 12 big regions in France known as the Nouvelle-Aquitaine, and this is the Dordogne. So you could be confused because some people say, oh yes, that's right, Lynn, thank you. If you like the video, it really helps on YouTube. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that little bell so you get the notifications next to the subscribe button, and make sure to like this video and any video you watch on my channel, please, because it really helps. Thanks, Lynn, for reminding me. So the Dordogne is also referred to as the Périgord. The Dordogne is the name of the old province, but it also is the name of the administrative division that this region is in. So people will use interchangeably Dordogne or Périgord. So don't let that fool you. Now, the Périgord is divided into 4 different regions itself. There is the green Périgord, the white Périgord, the purple Périgord, and the black Périgord. We are headed for the black Périgord today. A lot of the sites I'm going to show you are in that section. It doesn't mean the other sections aren't good, but it means that, you know, this is where I happen to travel, and I know that area very well because I have cousins there. So when you go to the Périgord, I saw somebody say la belle France. Yeah, this is beautiful France. And the people who go to the Périgord or the Dordogne usually end up falling in love with it because of the beautiful scenery. There is a very relaxed pace of life, and the scenery is absolutely gorgeous. You see, it's very rural. You have, yep, there is a purple Périgord, that's right. It's very rural. You'll see beautiful villages, rolling hills. The architecture, we'll talk about the architectural style. I look at this picture of, it was a wheat, I think it was wheat in that field. Now, I need to say that the photos were taken by Frederick Savoye, who is a very talented photographer. He lives in Seattle, and I will be sure to link to his website. Frederick is my ex-husband, and he's allowed me to use his beautiful photos that he took over a couple trips that we took to the area together with our son years ago. And please make sure to read the video notes. Whenever you go on YouTube to one of my most recent videos, I always share a lot of information there. What I love about the Périgord is that as soon as you come out of the cities, you're likely to see scenes like this. You're likely to see a car that is not built, manufactured anymore, that was a huge hit in France for several decades. It's a beautiful Citroën 2 chevaux, the famous deux douches, as the French call it. You know, it's my favorite car in the whole entire world, and people actually still use them. So there is, sometimes it's like being back in time a little bit. When I said relaxed pace of life, I actually meant it. This photo was taken in Sarlat. That dog was he was just taking a sweet little nap in a box, in a crate. The food is incredible. In southwestern France in general, it's pretty hearty food, and a lot of it, if you go to that area, is based on duck or goose. And you see them roaming freely in farms. And foie gras is, of course, a specialty, but a lot of the menus in restaurants will feature duck, which is canard. We don't pronounce the D, so it's canard, and then goose, which is oie. OIE. So they're pretty happy. They roam freely, and then there is what they do to them so they can fatten them up and have a big liver that is later consumed as foie gras. This is the cassoulet, a very hearty stew from southwestern France, and you can see it was flavored with duck. Now, the region is not just scenery and countryside. It's also beautiful towns and cities. And I would think it's pretty accurate to say that the crowning jewel of the Périgord is Sarlat, S-A-R-L-A-T, Sarlat. Sarlat la Canéda is actually the name. Sarlat is magnificent, and if you walk around the old town, the historical center of town, you will not believe your eyes. You see the cathedral here in the background. Sarlat it's called La Cathédrale Saint-Sacerdoce, and there's been an abbey there since the 9th century. So the cathedral, the church, was built over time, of course, but the clock tower is very unusual. Do you see the shape of it? It dates back to the 17th century. You also notice the colors of the facades. They have stone quarries in the area, and limestone is everywhere, and they use that building material extensively. And then we have to talk about the rooftops, very steep rooftops. They use a stone from those limestone quarries called lauze, L-A-U-Z-E. And so the lauze is a very heavy stone that they carve and thin out so the stones can be piled on top of each other to build these rooftops. At the beginning, the color is more ochre, and then with time, they turn kind of a grayish color, and that's very specific of that area. It takes a lot of skill, and it is a skill that is passed down from generation to generation. So Sarlat is picture perfect. There is a reason why it's picture perfect. I will mention that in a moment. Here is the cathedral I just mentioned. You see the interesting looking clock tower here. Here it is at night. And at night, it's, oh, I'm glad. Yeah, Sylvain saw a Lauze roof, a documentary about it. Yeah, it's very interesting to watch. The artisans are very skilled in that area. You see the lifestyle here. All these people sitting outside. Now, you all know how much we've missed our terraces, our cafes and restaurants, which are about to reopen on Tuesday next week. We are so thrilled. But look at these people enjoying a nice, relaxed evening in the summer outside, watching the world go by or chatting with friends. And I like this photo that Frederick took because it highlights some of the beautiful architecture. Sarlat has a lot of medieval homes from the High Middle Ages, so let's say 13th century and later, and a lot of Renaissance homes from the 16th century. And the reason it is so well preserved, all of downtown, is because I mentioned that before. In the 1960s, during the de Gaulle presidency, we had a minister of culture named André Malraux who passed some groundbreaking legislation, and that legislation enabled France, the French government, to help protect not just a building, a museum, but entire neighborhoods. And the first city in France that benefited from this was Sarlat. An example that you know is Le Marais in Paris, that beautiful neighborhood. It was nothing like what it is today. Neither was Sarlat, in fact, before the Malraux laws were passed in the 60s. So realize that there is a lot of investment behind that and a lot of work, a lot of time too. Sarlat is famous for its Saturday market, and in the summer it is a touristy destination, and in the summer it is packed. If it's the whole street is lined up with stalls like this, produce, crafts, and if you don't get there early, prepare to work your way through this crowd elbow to elbow to elbow. So some people get really turned off by that, but it's a beautiful market. It's a lot of fun. Okay. So now that we've talked about Sarlat, no, it's not going to be too packed this summer, Sylvain. I guess you're right. There won't be as many tourists, even though we don't know, because Sarlat, the Périgord in general, are very popular with the French and also with the Europeans. Entire villages are owned by English people. So I'm pretty sure that Europeans will still come to that area, but it's the other travelers we may not get. We may not get Americans, Chinese tourists, etc. But there will be tourists in Sarlat, I'm pretty certain. Sylvain lives down there. So look at this map. This is what I found to explain to you what we're about to do. So in the Périgord Noir, the Black Périgord, you have two valleys following two rivers. La Vézère, which is right here, and La Dordogne, which is right there. And they connect here, and then the Dordogne goes west towards Bordeaux. Okay? So La Vézère, the Vézère Valley, is mostly known for its prehistoric sites. If you like history and would like to see history as far as it goes, which is basically the prehistory, then you have to go to the Vézère Valley. I'm going to show you just some of the sites. There's so many there. The Dordogne Valley, on the other hand, is more well known for its chateaus. A lot of medieval chateaus, but also some Renaissance chateaus. And today we will talk about one of them because a very special lady lived there. So let's do this. When you talk about prehistory in the Vézère Valley, the most famous site, no doubt, is Lascaux. Lascaux, Lascaux, is a cave that was found in 1940 by some young boys and their dog just before the German occupation started. And the cave remained open, and people flocked after World War II. People flocked to see these paintings on the walls of that cave dating back to the old Stone Age. They couldn't believe it. And so after about 20 years, that was during the de Gaulle presidency, the same André Malraux I mentioned earlier decided the cave was going to get closed because the paintings were starting to deteriorate. All these people breathing on the paintings, it wasn't good for the cave. So they closed it, and it took 20 years for them to build a replica, Lascaux II, that was opened in 1983, and Lascaux II basically recreated most of the cave, not all of it. Then there was a Lascaux III, which was a traveling exhibit. It went around the world, and 3 years ago, they opened what you see on this building, which, by the way, is an award-winning building. It's called Lascaux IV, and they called it the International Center of Parietal Art. Parietal art means what's on the walls, the paintings. So the building itself is amazing, but what's inside is even more striking, because they have recreated the entirety of that original cave that was found in 1940. Not only will you feel like you're in the original cave, but then the whole complex teaches you about the people who came here before us. So it's a very fascinating place. Look at that. It took a lot of work. That was years in the making. Now, don't feel you have to go to the famous caves. In Lascaux, you have to book your tickets in advance. There are huge crowds. There are other caves that are well known, but not as famous maybe, and they may be a better choice. This one is called Font de Gaume. Font like font, de Gaume, G-A-U-M-E. And it's actually two caves, and they are outside a small town known as Les Aisies by the river. And you have about 200 representations of animals that are either painted or engraved, and some of them are in color. Picture this. This is at least 2 million years old. This is, I don't know if you can see it. It's an animal. Look at that. It's in color. Look at these. Look at the precision. Now, a favorite of mine is the Rouffignac cave, which sits a little bit north of the Vézère River, a little bit farther out. I went last year with a Rick Steves Europe group because we have a tour that takes tour members there. I like this cave because it's very deep and narrow. It's about 10 miles long. So the only way to visit it, or to visit a section of it, I should say, is with a little train. So you get on the train, and they take you to the bowels, literally, of that cave. And then when you get to the end, you get off the train with your guide, and he points out some of the things you see on the ceiling. And that cave is about 10,000 years old. And it was used by bears as well, by animals. So you see the bears scratch the walls, so you see all the marks that they left. And then you see those incredible representations of animals, including a lot of woolly mammoths. Like here, that is what the Grotte de Rouffignac, or Rouffignac Cave, is well known for. So I think you get the picture. There's a lot, you can visit a lot of caves, a lot of prehistoric sites, there are museums, there's a lot to do and learn in the Vézère Valley. One more thing I'd like to show you are troglodytes homes. They have limestone, and limestone is somewhat easier to carve out. And troglodyte homes, for those of you who may not know, are homes that were carved out of the rock, carved out of the cliff by people. This site is known as the village of the Madeleine. I visited it with my son, and it dates back to prehistoric time, probably about 17,000 years ago. This is not the original settlement. The settlement was at the bottom of the cliff here. This is the village that was built in the Middle Ages and built upon through the Middle Ages. There is a chapel you can see in there that's from the 15th century, and the ruins of an old castle from the 13th century. So you can visit it, and I have a picture that will show you what it looks like when you're inside. So imagine people in the Middle Ages feeling invincible when they lived up there, because they had this view on the valley and the river. They could see everything that was coming at them, and they sat way up high on the cliff. So you had people living there pretty much from the Middle Ages to the 19th century. If you go to the Loire Valley, for example, in Amboise and other places, you will see in the Anjou, which is a beautiful region, you will see other troglodyte homes where people still live today. You can see, and others are used to grow mushroom and other things, asparagus, mushroom, but there are people who still live, not in something quite as big as the Madeleine, this one, but individual homes, and people still live there. So this is the little presentation about the Vézère Valley, Valley number 1, if you will. And now here's the presentation on the second valley, the Dordogne Valley. It's my favorite. One of the fun things to do, and you can do it on either river, is canoeing. So this is my son when he was much younger, and I'm sitting in the front. And it's not just canoeing. It's actually canoeing with glorious sights along the way on both sides. Chateaus, beautiful scenery. I mean, there's a lot to see and do. If you don't like canoeing, there are several places where you can catch one of these flat bottom boats, just like in the Loire Valley. They're known as les gabarres, G-A-B-A-R-R-E-S, les gabarres. So you can do the tour on a gabarre and enjoy the sights, or you can do like gazillions of people in the summer. You can see them here in the background. They're all renting those canoes. So this is definitely something fun to do. Here is La Roque-Gajac, one of the lovely little towns. A lot of the canoe rides start or end there. And it's, look at the cliff above it. You can see that some people probably lived up there too. So that's La Roque-Gajac along the Dordogne River. But this section is called the Valley of the Five Castles for a reason. Now, my cousins who live in the area tell me that there are more castles in the Périgord than in the Loire Valley. And you know what? It's probably true. There are so many castles there, big ones, small ones, some are state-owned, some are privately owned. But there are the big ones, you know, it's like everywhere else. And when you talk about the big chateaus of the Dordogne Valley, Castelnau, the one you're looking at now, comes first because Castelnau is perfectly preserved. It was built in the 12th century and it's the quintessential medieval fortress. You can see the weaponry they used in the Middle Ages, like those giant war machines, the trebuchets. There is a part that's a museum. To me, it's a little bit like Disneyland in the summer. They have those shows where people dress in costumes and they show you how people fight and the duels, etc. So it's very touristy, but it's also incredible to think that these walls have been there since the 12th century, that they have known so many wars. They survived the 100 Years' War. They survived the religious wars or religion wars of the 16th century, and they've seen it all. So Castelnau, during the 100 Years' War, was English. As you know, the southwest of France, the Aquitaine was English for quite a long time. But some of the chateaux were not. So they would spy on each other from across the river. And Castelnau's big rival, we took this picture, Fred took this picture from Castelnau, and you see the big rival in the back here, which is Benac. I prefer Benac to Castelnau because it's a little less developed, maybe. The tours are very interesting. The village that's around the chateau is also lovely. So Benac and Castelnau kind of spying on each other, and Benac was always French. It never was on the English side. So they would just spy on each other. Now, once you've had your fill of medieval chateaus, don't give up quite yet. You're not done. There are chateaus there that you go see for their gardens. Oh, there's one more picture of Benac, actually, from the river. Look how pretty this is, with the town that's kind of winds down to the river from the top. So some of the chateaus are also well known for their gardens. This one's called Marquessac. And Marquessac, a lot of the names in southwestern France, it's a sure thing when you see names like that, AC, it means you're in southwestern France and in the old Gascony. So Marquessac is famous for its gardens, in particular the way they treat the boxwood there. They prune the boxwood by hand to this day. So acres, and the way it's done, the chateau sits up high, so it's old terraced gardens. It's just kind of clinging on the side of the hill. Would you look at this? After that, you never prune anything ever again because you've seen perfection and nothing you can do can possibly duplicate that. The views, by the way, from the top of Marquessac, even if you're not into gardens, is well worth a trip because you overlook the Dordogne Valley, the river. You see several chateaus from up there. So it's really, really beautiful. But the chateau we will be talking about today is not Marquessac or Castelnau or Benac. This is the chateau that we are going to talk about today. And this chateau was built in 1489, so end of the 15th century. And the interesting story is that it was built for the wife of the lord who at the time owned the big Castelnau chateau I showed you earlier. It was the 15th century or the end of the 15th century, the Renaissance and its more civilized lifestyle was around the corner. And the wife of that lord, his name was François de Caumont, told him she was done living in Castelnau, drafty, dark, Castelnau, medieval chateaus had hardly any windows because of their protection. So she said, build me a chateau where I can be happy and live a civilized life. So he built her this beautiful chateau known as Les Milandes, M-I-L-A-N-D-E-S. Now, of course, it's been renovated extensively, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, and they renovated it in the Renaissance style, which was prevalent in the 16th century. But we are going to talk now about the very special lady who lived for more than 20 years of her life at Les Milandes in this beautiful place. So if you are ready, we need to travel back in time, because now we are going to talk about Josephine Baker. Now, I know the name is familiar to a lot of people. And Josephine Baker, allons-y, says Jacqueline. Yay! Josephine Baker was not born Josephine Baker. She was born Frida Josephine MacDonald in St. Louis, Missouri. And she was born in 1906. And she was very young when there were some very bad racial riots in her town in 1917, right before World War I. And they made a big impression on her. So she ran away from home and decided to go to New York City, because at the time, to a poor girl like her, it was an attractive place. I guess she already knew she could be a performer. She got married when she was 13. The marriage lasted 1 year. And she arrived in New York City, and her timing was impeccable, because in New York City, Harlem, which was the neighborhood where Black people would live or lived, Harlem was undergoing the Harlem Renaissance. So Josephine found her spot right there. She became a vaudeville performer. She played in Broadway revues. Along the way, she got married a second time. She was not even 20 years old yet, for about 4 years, to a gentleman who will give her her last name. His name was William Howard Baker. And from that day on, Josephine was Josephine Baker. In 1925, she'd had enough of New York City, and she decided to go to Paris. Now remember, 1925, these are the roaring 20s in Paris. This is the time after World War I when a lot of people flocked to Paris and to Europe in general, a lot of Americans in particular, determined to have a good time, to enjoy life, and to forget the horrors of the Great War. Again, her timing is impeccable, because as soon as she arrives in Paris, she joins a very popular jazz show that was known as La Revue Nègre. She plays on stereotypes, she doesn't care, and she is not a very good singer at that point, but she is very energetic, very funny, very self-deprecating. She's a beautiful girl, and she can dance. And so all of her performances are really wild and very risque as well. Merci, Mona. Very risque as well. This is the famous banana skirt, and Josephine performed practically naked under that banana skirt. What she liked the most about Parisian society at that time was that it was integrated, and that was very different from what she had experienced in New York City. Nobody cared that Josephine was Black. Josephine was the toast of the town. And I would say by the late 1920s, early 1930s, she started shooting movies. She was the first African-American female to start in motion pictures. And she was probably the most photographed star in Europe. So Josephine was always thankful to Paris and to France for giving her a life and a career and basically accepting her. And we will see that she showed that in many ways in her life. This is at the peak of her stardom, the beautiful Josephine Baker, very exotic. And she was also a bit of an original, a diva, you might say, a star, a real star. She loved animals, and in particular wild animals, and she had animals around her for the rest of her life. And some of them were not your usual pets, right? This was something she could afford to do. And this is Josephine right before the start of World War II, so in the early 30s. And she was, there we go. This is a scene that's not, this is a scene that has nothing to do with partying and the roaring 20s. And I'm sure many of you know what this is, because we talked about this just a few weeks ago when we talked about how French artists behaved during the German occupation. This photo actually refers to a time in French history known as the Exode, the Exodus. After the very short-lived Battle of France in 1940, France surrendered to Germany, and when French people, in particular Parisians, heard the German troops were headed to Paris, they fled. Millions of people took to the roads and tried to find safety anywhere they could, with relatives in southern France, in western France, everywhere. And you had children, seniors, you had women. They tried to bring a few things along with them. It was a very painful time. And we talked about that. The artists did the same thing. People like Edith Piaf, Charles Trenet, even Josephine Baker, they left Paris at that point. And in 1937, so just 3 years before this, Josephine had taken her first trip to Le Périgord. And with the exception of, there was no tourism there, right? So she got there to visit a friend, and then she fell in love with Les Milandes. She saw the chateau, and she really loved it. And she decided pretty quickly after that to rent it. But by that time, Josephine had married her third husband. His name was Jean Lyon, but his last name was actually Lévy. He was Jewish. And she was black, he was Jewish. She knew nothing good would come out of Hitler and the Germans, or the Nazi, I should say, invading France. At that point, she decided to become a French citizen. And we will see that it had a big impact on what she did during the war. In 1939, when the war started, when France and England declared war on Germany, Josephine was already performing for French troops. She was the godmother of many French soldiers, and she would write every evening before going to bed, she would write letters to them. She would send them care packages herself. Remember, she was one of the greatest stars in Europe at that time. Imagine Madonna doing that kind of stuff. Josephine at night writing letters to her, her adopted soldiers and sending them care packages. And she always paid, she was very generous, always paid out of her own money. But what happened in 1940 was that immediately at the start of the war, she was approached at a party by the French intelligence services. And they were looking for celebrities. They were looking for people that the Germans would respect, that could kind of mingle with the Germans and other people, important, influential people, and gather intelligence that they could share with France. Josephine was approached at her house in Le Vésinet outside Paris, and she replied very enthusiastically. She said, "I want to give back to France. France has given me everything, and I will do anything I can. I will be honored to help." And help she did. As early as 1939, she was mingling. She went to a party where Mussolini was, the Italian leader, and he loved her. And she got information from Mussolini, which she shared with the future Free French forces, which didn't quite exist at the time yet, but the French intelligence services. And then she went back to Les Milandes at the beginning of the war. She started hiding refugees. She had people who were starting to organize some sort of a resistance locally. She started hiding weapons. But things were a little bit turning dangerous on her, because the Germans became suspicious and eventually made it to Les Milandes and said, what's going on here? She was fine. She got away with it. But after that, the intelligence services, French intelligence services, said, we're going to send you on a mission. You're going to go to Spain, and then you're going to go, if you accept, to North Africa. North Africa, as a form, the French colonies were in the hands or ruled by the Vichy government, the puppet government in Vichy, and the war was going to happen there eventually. That's what happened at the end of 1941 when Allied forces landed there. So Josephine went to those countries and did exactly what I described. She gathered intelligence. She sang for the French soldiers, always for free. She sold jewelry to support the resistance. And she was actually in Morocco for several years. What's really sad, though, is when she got to North Africa in June of 1941, she became extremely ill. She had her third or fourth of her miscarriages, and there was a bad infection, and she had to go through a hysterectomy. She loved kids. She wanted to have kids, but at that point, she understood she would never have children. And then the infection spread, and she actually almost died from sepsis. So she was in the hospital in North Africa, between June 1941 and the end of 1942 for 19 months, right before the Allied forces landed there. Do you think she rested in the hospital? No, no, no. She became a major propaganda agent, I would say. When the Americans visited her, Americans were around already, when they visited her, she would talk them into supporting General de Gaulle, who's trying to establish himself as the official leader of France from London. And she asked the Americans to support Free French forces as well. She had a lot of influence, and she did all that from the hospital. And as soon as she left the hospital, she embarked on a jeep with some of her musicians, and she went around North Africa all the way to the Middle East with her own money, performing for French soldiers, performing for nurses. I'm going to skip that because I forgot to talk about the Germans in Paris. And this is what she did. She performed. And of course, that took a huge toll on her health because she was recovering from a 19-month stay in the hospital. But she would not give up. She even met General de Gaulle in Algiers during the war. And you know what she did? He gave her a little bit of a piece of jewelry, I guess, more like a distinction that was very valuable. And Josephine sold it and gave the whole money to the French resistance. So she was really a patriot. And she wanted to give back to France. At the end of the war, before the end of the war, she officially joined the French Air Force. She was a second lieutenant, and she joined the French Air Force in their offices as intelligence services. And she continued campaigning for the victory of France and the Allied forces. There she is in North Africa. You can see General de Gaulle representing Free French forces in the background. These women were high-ranking women. And she came that day to write a big check that was going to go to the French army and the resistance. So Josephine did some pretty incredible things and took huge risks, because she could have been arrested, tortures, who knows what. But she was kind of a happy-go-lucky person, an optimist, and she always said, they like me. The Germans loved her, the Nazis loved her as an artist, so did Mussolini, so she always figured she'd be fine. And she'd hide information in her underwear at those parties and then pass it along to the Free French forces or the intelligence, to the intelligence services. At the end of the war, she came back to France. She went to Paris, and she realized what the Parisians had gone through during the war while she was in North Africa. And you have to realize that people were starving. It took France and Paris in particular more than 18 months to bounce back from the war. People were hungry, rationing tickets were still around. Well, Josephine sold whatever was left of her jewelry so she could buy food, and she organized, you see her right here holding that little child, and she was passing food out to Parisians. So what's important to understand is that at the time she was hugely popular, of course, because of her career and because she was such a nice gal passing out food in the streets. But nobody in France or anywhere else suspected what she had actually done during the war until just a few years ago when the archives were released and made public. The same thing happened with Coco Chanel. Nobody suspected the extent of the collaboration that Chanel engaged in, what she did for the Germans, spying and so forth, until a few years ago, which is why you've had several books on Chanel published in the last few years, as well as several books published on Josephine, because people they're kind of polar opposites in terms of how they handled World War II, if you will. And it's very interesting to know that. Those people around her in the street here knew that she was singing for soldiers, but nobody suspected the risks that she had taken during the war, because she was a real résistante. She was part of the French resistance. She was rewarded for everything she did. It took a few years, But about 10 years after the war, she was awarded several distinctions, and we're talking very prestigious ones, including the Legion of Honor. General de Gaulle had a lot of respect for her. They had met. She really liked General de Gaulle, and it was the same for him. He was really impressed with what she had done. So he pushed for the distinctions to be given to her, and she was given finally those distinctions. She received the medals at her home in Les Milandes in 1961. Look at her. She is beaming. Look how proud. And she is wearing her uniform from the French Air Force. She was so proud of her achievements during the war and those distinctions that when she joined Martin Luther King in Washington, D.C. in 1963 for the March on Washington, she was wearing that same uniform many, many years later and the same distinctions. And look at her, just happy. But the war was finally over, and Josephine's life was about to get busier. So Josephine, in 1947, 2 years after the war, stopped renting Les Milandes and decided to buy the property. And she married her fourth husband at that point. His name was Joe Bouillon. And finally, she got herself a good guy. I think they were married for close to 15 years. He was an orchestra conductor, and he moved to Les Milandes with her. Here is the chateau in all of its splendor. This is the chapel right outside the chateau where they got married in a lavish ceremony, because Josephine always did everything lavishly. And oh, look at that. I love this. You can see gargoyles. So you look at these photos and you have to wonder what it felt like for the poor child of St. Louis, Missouri, who had suffered from racism through her life in the US at least, to live in this fairy tale castle. Now, the reason a lot of people like Les Milandes is because, like Chenonceau in the Loire Valley, it is a very feminine chateau. Remember, I told you it was built in the end of the 15th century for a woman, and it really shows. And the people who've done the successive restorations have really kept that about Les Milandes. It's a very special place. Picture Josephine outside these walls, looking up and saying, "This is all mine. This is mine." And you see those rooftops we talked about with the Lauze, L-A-U-Z-E? You can imagine the work it is to build this, because look how tight all these little stones, flat little stones, have been laid in together. That's crazy. Jacqueline says it's mon chateau. You will have to take a number, my dear, because I think I will stake a claim on this one. Now, I'd just like to mention that Josephine went back to the United States. She had left in 1925, and she took several trips there. That didn't turn out so well for her. She went between 1947 and 1951 in the hope of maybe resuming a career or starting a career in the United States. And every time she went, she was a victim of racism. And we will see in a few minutes what happened one time when she was there. This is Josephine and her biggest project, definitely in her life. Her biggest project was to adopt 12 children, which she nicknamed the Rainbow Tribe. And as you know, as a message of tolerance and brotherly love. And these kids were all orphans, and they came from very different backgrounds, different colors, different religions. And there she is at Les Milandes with the kids. And Joe, the husband, who was really supporting her, he was, like I said, a pretty nice guy. And so Josephine was proud, and she showed them off on TV. And she would always get the message across that people have to get along. It's very important, a message of peace and tolerance. It was a big part of her life. Here they are having, I don't know what, lunch or dinner with Mom, who's sitting at the end of the table with Maman, in the kitchen of the chateau that you can still visit today when you go. And here's what you see if you go today. The table is still there. And then in the fireplace, you have those lovely little tiles. She ordered these so the kids could learn the names of things. So some of the tiles represented fish, animals, vegetable, and it's still there. Now, remember when I said she was an original, she liked beautiful things. I didn't stress very much that she loved to spend. Josephine was generous with others, but she loved to spend money. When she redid the bathroom at Les Milandes, this is what she came up with. And it may look like black tile on the walls here or here, but in fact it's not tile. It's glass from Murano in Italy, and a lot of the glass pieces are covered in sheets of gold, and the you see the taps here, the faucets, they were also in plated gold. So Josephine, you know, she didn't watch money, and we will see why that became a problem. But this is what I think she was so influential about. So she had done the war and the resistance during the war. She had created those, you know, that rainbow tribe with the children, advocating for tolerance, speaking against racism. And she was also a visionary because she saw the potential of the Périgord. She saw the potential of that region for tourism. So of course, after the war, the cave, Lascaux Cave, had been found. So some people were starting to come to the Périgord to see the cave before it was closed in the 60s. But Josephine had bigger projects in mind. She created the village of the world. So here is the chateau, and here is where the village sat by the river. So picture kind of a smaller Disneyland, like a city, a town, a small town next to Castelnau, the town. It had its own gas station, its own post office, there were restaurants, there was a putt-putt, there was a hotel, and most importantly, there was a concert hall where Josephine Baker performed, and her famous artist friends performed as well. So people came from all over to see this. Now, her crowning possession, I think, was the jewel, the J-shaped pool. J-shaped pool for Josephine. Now, it is still here today, in case you're wondering what happened to the village of the world. It's called the Josephine Baker Park. And of course, it's owned by a different by a company now. But you can still visit this place, which she helped turn into a major touristic attraction. The problem, yeah, that's right, Jacqueline, you need one of those pools too. That would work for you very well. The problem is the next few years would be very difficult ones for Josephine. She was a visionary, she was a powerhouse, she was ambitious, but she was no businesswoman. And like I said, she spent lavishly. It's been said that some local artisans probably took advantage of her. Whenever she did work on the complex there or on the chateau, they would send quotes. The quotes were probably a little bumped up because they were talking to Josephine Baker. She didn't check, she just signed away. She just spent left and right. But then the creditors started asking for money, and she became at risk in the early 60s of losing Les Milandes. I mean, she had 100 people working for her at that village of the world, plus the staff that worked in the chateau with the 12 children. So she decided that she would go back to the stage, because what else do you do when you're a performer? And she made some appearances where she talked about Les Milandes, and she asked for people to help her and support her project. And she had a big comeback in several of the famous cabarets and concert halls where she had performed so successfully through the 20s and 30s. People tried to help her. General de Gaulle, who was still president then, tried to help her. Brigitte Bardot, you know Brigitte Bardot, who was a huge star in the 60s. Brigitte Bardot, who was famously reclusive and hated the press, actually came on television dressed to the nines, very proper for Brigitte Bardot. You can see that interview on YouTube, it's somewhere out there. She spoke on behalf of Josephine Baker, and the interesting thing is she had never met Josephine Baker, but she said, we have to help her. we have to help Josephine save her home. But it didn't really work. And eventually, Josephine lost Les Milandes. In spite of all the concerts she did in France, in Paris, and around Europe, she lost it. And it was horrific because Les Milandes was her fairy tale castle. It was her dream. It was the place where she was raising her family. It was the village of the world where she entertained people. The children who were there when people came to kick her out said it was extremely traumatic because she refused to leave. She was clinging to the stove in the kitchen, the big heavy stove, and the men were just hitting her forearms to make her let go. And she found herself on the doorsteps of the kitchen in her bare feet. And let me tell you, it was March. And in the Dordogne in March, it's really cold. You see how somebody placed a blanket in her lap? And there were grocery bags. She was like a homeless lady. And she was homeless. She had lost her home. And those pictures went around France in the news. Of course, it was too late to help her. People were just shocked because this was a very despondent Josephine. This was not the Josephine Baker that people had grown used to see. But through her troubles, Josephine always regrouped. She had survived so many things and taken so many risks. And she had a great friend that she could rely on. When she went back to the United States, like I mentioned earlier, right after the war, to try and perform in some places in New York, she met racism once again, got embroiled in a scandal at a place called the Stork Club. People refused to serve her because she was black, and she could not believe it. She could not believe that after the war, these things were still happening in her country, in her native land. That night at the Stork Club, when they disrespected her, a very famous American actress at the time, Grace Kelly, was there with her entourage. And she was shocked to see what was happening to Josephine. She was so shocked that she stood up and stormed out of the place, vowing to never return again, caught up with Josephine, and from that day forward, they became fast friends. When Josephine lost Les Milandes in 1969, Princess Grace was by her side immediately. And Princess Grace offered her a place to live on the French Riviera for her and her family. And she was really kind to her. She also organized concerts, shows where Josephine would perform in southern France. In 1973, Josephine finally went back to the United States and finally performed at Carnegie Hall, where she was a huge hit and got a standing ovation. She had left the United States in 1925, had gone back maybe 3 times, had only met racism and disrespectful treatment. Finally, in 1973, at the end of her life, she was treated like a real star in New York City. In 1975, to celebrate her 50 years in show business, she returned to her beloved Paris and to Bobino, the famous place where so many performers have been, French, foreign. I mean, it's just an iconic place in Paris. It's in the 14th arrondissement. And Josephine was a huge hit. And she signed up to do quite a few shows. And she did a few. She was 69 years old and she looked amazing. And everybody was there to cheer her on. I heard that Mick Jagger was there. Everybody who was somebody in the 70s was there, including, of course, her friend, Princess Grace. But after a few shows, Josephine had a stroke one night at the hotel where she was, and she fell in a deep coma, was taken to the hospital, and she died the following morning in April of 1975. Look at the people who came to see her at Bobino. This is Dalida, the famous French-Italian or Egyptian-Italian, I should say, performer who lived in Montmartre for a good part of her life and was such a popular entertainer in France and in Europe. So everybody was there for Josephine. But Josephine was gone. Josephine, her long life, it was over. But it was not quite over yet, because the French, who, remember, did not know really what she had done during the war yet, the French gave her a worthy tribute. Tens of thousands of people went in the streets. There were massive traffic jams. There was a mass organized at the Madeleine Church, as happens always for celebrities. And do you see how they drove the car in front of Bobino, where she had performed just 2 nights before or 3 nights before, and her name was still on the marquee on the way to the church. And at the church, the first person to come out of the church was her friend, who by then had become Princess Grace of Monaco. General de Gaulle was long dead, but his son-in-law was there to represent the de Gaulle family. There were also some officials, many celebrities, but mostly there were French people. There were Parisians who had come to say goodbye to La Baker, which was her nickname, La Baker. My grandma would say La Baker. That's what she called Josephine. And realize as well that not only had she received the Legion of Honor, she was also the first American woman to receive full military honors for her funeral. So that was a pretty big deal. When she was buried in Monaco, where she was taken, Princess Grace, of course, organized everything. That's where Josephine is buried. And her ex-husband, Joe Bouillon, would join her. That's where he's buried as well. Her sister declared at her funeral in Monaco, there were 3 things that Josephine clearly loved. She loved her children, first of all. She loved the theater. And she loved France. When you go to Les Milandes today, you can really, especially knowing this story in detail now, you will really appreciate the awesome work that the family who's owned Les Milandes for about 20 years now, it's a local family. The young woman who's featured a lot in YouTube videos, she's a really great person to promote Josephine and her life. She has been running the world hunting down private collectors so she could buy back from them all the beautiful dresses that Josephine wore on stage. And she has been able to get the famous banana skirt from the 1920s, which is amazing. There's also a room where you can see her uniform from the French Air Force and her distinctions. So the house is full of Josephine. But it's not creepy, not in a creepy way. You can just picture how happy, how proud she must have been in that house. There are photos on all the walls, some, throughout her life. I like this one. I think it's a very pretty picture of her. And we haven't forgotten Josephine in France. I love this picture too. It's my favorite of her. Yes, she lived a very full life, a worthy life. Josephine Baker, there's a pool, a floating pool on the Seine River where people swim. There is also a square in the 14th arrondissement right next to Bobino, where she performed for the last time. And there is a plaque on that square that reads, Josephine Baker, music hall artist, second lieutenant of the Free French Forces, philanthropist. So this is, we haven't forgotten her. She's still there. But my favorite tribute to Josephine Baker is the statue that stands at the entrance of the small town where Les Milandes is located. It's called Castelnau. And as you arrive into town, there is a kind of a little area on the side of the road. It's very unassuming. And there is this beautiful statue of Josephine hugging one of her children. And around her are the roses that were named after her. So I think this statue is a very fitting tribute to this wonderful lady. That's right, the swimming pool should be J-shaped in Paris as well. So this is the end of my presentation of Josephine, and we will have a question and answer because we have time today, so that's great. I would like, it's been an hour, so yeah, if you have time to stay, you're welcome to stay. I'll keep running for a little while. If you have questions, and I'll show you my apéro, it's the tradition. But I'd like to dedicate, yes, we're going to do the song as well, yes. So yeah, maybe we'll be here for another 20 minutes or so, just as a heads up. I would like to dedicate this presentation to Josephine Baker, who was une grande dame, a great lady, and who continues to inspire me, who has inspired me for so many years. I wrote a story about her years ago on the blog, which I will be sharing in the notes on the video if you haven't read it. And she's inspiring many people still today, especially now that we know what happened during the war. I would also like to dedicate this presentation to George Lloyd. And I will be preparing the song for, so because I'm assuming you want to listen to Josephine, don't you? So the song we have picked is, no, wait for me, Josephine. She's in a hurry. All right, so the song, did you enjoy the story? I'm glad you enjoyed it. This is wonderful. Well, you know, Jacqueline, YouTube seems to be working. I'll see how I can collect the replay. You know, the trick, the test is always the replay. Yeah, see, we have about 115 people here, which is amazing. And I have 51 likes. So guys, just give me likes on this video, please. It means a lot to YouTube, apparently. I know you like me already, but YouTube needs to see those likes and those minutes watched or whatever they call it. It's a big deal. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it the second time around. I did change things a little bit and added photos to make it even more interesting. Perfect. Okay, so thank you for the feedback. That's amazing. So now I might need my light again because we want to see what's going on here. And now if you noticed, I'm doing this at my desk, so the setup is a little bit different today. So I have to make sure that I can, voila, as we usually do, right? So the song you remember maybe from last time, this is her iconic song. Now, if I hold it here, can everybody read or do you see the comments in the way? Is it good here? Or do I move it? Can someone tell me? Oh, you're welcome, Ricky. Yeah, you can read? We can read. Okay, cool. Thanks, Jacqueline. All right, so the song is J'ai deux amours, I have two loves, and it's a song written in 1930, so at the beginning of her career, or at the peak of her career, I should say. And that song was a big hit when it came out. It's become her anthem a little bit, because she refers, you know, she was exotic, and so you can hear that in the song. There's a reference to the savannah in Africa, for example, but it's also a song that's clearly a love declaration to her adoptive land, France. And so it's very special for that reason. And then, of course, her beautiful voice that she spent so much time developing and working on. So let's translate the words. On dit qu'au-delà des mers, là-bas sous le ciel clair, il existe une cité au séjour enchanté. It is said that above the seas, over there under the clear sky, exists a city where the stay is enchanted. And under, et sous les grands arbres noirs, chaque soir, vers elle s'en va tout mon espoir. And under the big trees, every evening, towards it leaves all my hope. And then the famous chorus, J'ai deux amours, mon pays et Paris, pour eux toujours mon cœur est ravi. I have two loves, my country and Paris, by them always in my heart, is my heart enraptured. Ma savane est belle, mais à quoi bon le nier? Ce qui m'ensorcelle, c'est Paris tout entier. My savannah is beautiful, but why deny it? What puts a spell on me is Paris, Paris as a whole. Le voir un jour, c'est mon rêve joli. J'ai deux amours, mon pays et Paris. Seeing it one day as my pretty dream, I have two loves, my country and Paris. And then she repeats, Ma savane est belle, mais à quoi bon le nier? Ce qui m'ensorcelle, c'est Paris tout entier. My savannah is beautiful, but why deny it? What puts a spell on me is Paris, Paris as a whole. Le voir un jour, c'est mon rêve joli. J'ai deux amours, mon pays et Paris. Seeing it one day is my pretty dream. I have two loves, my country and Paris. Okay, are we ready to listen to Josephine Baker? I hope it's loud enough, but it usually is, right? Okay, sorry. Here we go.
Au-delà des mers, là-bas sur le ciel clair, il existe une cité au séjour enchanté. Et sur les grands arbres noirs, chaque soir, vers elle s'en va tout mon espoir. J'ai deux amours, mon pays Paris, toujours, mon cœur est ravi, ma savane est belle, mais à quoi bon le nier, ce qui m'ensorcelle, c'est Paris, Paris tout entier. Le voir un jour, c'est mon rêve joli. Les deux amours, mon pays Paris. Ce qui m'ensorcelle, c'est Paris, Paris tout entier. Le voir un jour, j'ai deux amours, mon pays.
Merci Joséphine pour tout. Okay. What did we think, my little friends? Chills, huh?
Les cheveux blancs, je crois que ça.
Chills. Hello, are you there? Are you there still? Connect, I'm reconnecting. I'm still here if you are. Yeah, I'm still here. Okay. I think it stopped spinning. We should be okay. Great. Okay, we're here. Perfect. All right. So just a few words about l'apéro. I think you know, this is something I started during the lockdown, and it was a way for me to connect live with a lot of you, which I hadn't done. I had never done some live streaming, so I thought I'd start doing it with an exercise I'm comfortable in, which is teaching and presenting, and I think it's been pretty successful. The problem with the apéro is that it takes a lot of time to prepare, several hours a week, and on top of the teaching I do and other projects I'm trying to run, it's going to be difficult for me to keep doing it in its current format. But I have a fun project for later this summer that will be very similar to this, but in a slightly different format, which I think you will like as well. I will do one more apéro next week in this in its current form. I will do one more apéro next week because we didn't get the replay for the Coluche one last week. So if you want to hear the story, oh, I think it's cutting off again. if you want, can you hear me? Aha, I hope I'm not going to lose you. Okay, so next week I will read you, the Coluche one. So we have a replay for that one as well. And then I think it will become a monthly event, and I will explain to you later what I have in mind. I think you will like it. I see all the positive comments. Thank you very much. Now, you know that I launched a business almost 3 months ago called Friends with Véro, where I teach French. I also have a Patreon program, which is how a lot of people have been supporting me through all this, and I'm very grateful to my patrons. I want to encourage you to look up the Patreon program and the membership program it offers, because we have now a very fun, on top of the rewards that the subscribers get for very small contribution each month, we have our own private Facebook group that's been a lot of fun, and I can't believe how much fun they have had, all the patrons sharing photos and stories about their travels in France. It makes me feel really good to see how much fun they're having with that. I also do some Facebook Q&As live on that group, so this is one of the things that you can join if you join Patreon. I will put all that information under the video. I see this thing spinning, and I sure hope you can still hear me, because it's just spinning and spinning and spinning. Yeah, so monthly will be a different project. So because I do a lot, the truth is I still share content on Facebook and Instagram every day. But I also create a lot of exclusive content and events for my patrons. So in the end, it all comes to be a little too much. There are only so many hours in a day and so many days in a week. So I don't want to burn out. I want to make sure that I'm still enjoying this process. So for now, before we wrap up, I hope it works. I think it does. I can still see 93 people here. So I will show you my little apéro today. And if I do this, you should be able to see it. I'll do that. Bzz. Yeah, that works, right? Okay. It's the tradition. It's the tradition for l'apéro. So we have very simple things. I like to show products that come from the terroir of the region that I covered in the chat. And we were in the Périgord today. So I chose a cheese. I couldn't find the one I was looking for from the Dordogne. It's a goat cheese, but it comes from the Lot. And if you know where the Lot is very close to the Dordogne, in fact. So let's see, I'm lost here. The Dordogne is right here, the Périgord is right here, and the Lot is here, number 46. So the cheese and the wine come from these two areas. It's a very nice little goat cheese. That's covered in those food grade charcoal ashes for protection, and it has a pretty mild taste. I think I will enjoy it with my cereal bread, which is my favorite bread, some charcuterie, some cured ham, my favorite little cherry tomatoes, some peanuts, gotta have some peanuts, and then for dessert I'll probably have some cantaloupe, because cantaloupe is really good right now. But first I need to pour a glass of this. I've had this wine before, you may remember it. Le Haut Pays from the Périgord. It's a Merlot with some real kick. So I am going to pour a glass of that Merlot. Voila. And I am going to toast you, my friends. Voila. It should work if I do this, right? Yay, it works. Okay, it's maybe a little crooked. À votre santé. Thank you so much for following l'apéro with Véro for 10 weeks, for watching the replays when you could, for subscribing, for liking, for joining Patreon, and I'm really hoping that some of you are going to join me there. My goal is to have 300 patrons by the fall, and I think I have about 175 or 76. So we have a ways to go, but I know you can help me get there. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, that you will be thinking about Josephine Baker and all the great stuff she did. And if I find more information about her, I'll be sure to share it. Okay? So, à votre santé, mes amis. Bon week-end à tous. It is good. It is good. So I'll be doing my French taxes tomorrow. I am not looking forward to that in the least. That's going to take the whole afternoon probably. And next week I'll be working on writing this new French class I'm doing called French for the Traveler, which is not a class, it's a workshop. 4 weeks. It's something you do once only, but I already it's sold out, and I already have I think 8 to 10 people in that group. So I need to finish developing the curriculum for that workshop, and after that I'll move on to a new project that I'll be working on, and also start traveling. My plan is to travel through France this summer and continue filming and capturing photos and video, and I'll be sharing a lot of that with my patrons, so another good reason to join the program. For now, merci beaucoup everyone, merci for joining, and I hope I get a replay, because if I don't get a replay, it'll be sabotaged by Instagram because I ditched them. So let's hope we get a replay for this. Okay, you take care, my friends, and I will see you soon. À bientôt!